In 1916, during the height of World War I, a platoon of 8 German soldiers were secretly making their way through Transylvania, Romania one night. When looking for a place to sleep for the night, they stumbled upon something deadly. One of the soldiers, Ulrich Meyer, was captured shortly after by the Romanian army. He told his captors the terrifying details of what happened to his platoon that night. What he told them was written down and filed away for almost 80 years, having been made public within the last 25 years. On the cover of the file, the words Mima Pajori were written. Ulrich called what they encountered Schleiten des Tod in German, which in English translates to creeping death. This is his story as it's been translated to present-day English. I don't know what it was, but someone called it creeping death. We weren't even supposed to be in this area because the enemy was nearby. We'd taken a wrong turn as we came out of the mountains, but at that point we were too tired, cold, and hungry to hike back the way we came. We had no choice. We had to find somewhere in the city or close to it where we could find shelter for the night and maybe some food. It needed to be somewhere we wouldn't get found. It was dark as we quietly made our way along the outskirts of the town of Brasov in the Transylvania region. As we were sneaking along the edge of the forest, we came upon an old cemetery filled with several large crypts. As we crouched down along the cemetery's fence, our platoon's captain, Captain Braun, turned to us and whispered, "I think we should spend the night in one of these crypts. It'll keep us hidden, and it'll be warmer than sleeping outside." Us men looked at each other with hesitant expressions, not saying a word. I knew these men well and knew they did not want to spend the night in a crypt. I know I did not. Not when you're staring death in the face every day. Unfortunately, at the moment, it seemed like our only option. We were extremely tired after hiking through the mountains all day, and we certainly did not want to get found by the enemy. The fence surrounding the cemetery was about 6 feet high, so we each took turns climbing over while someone kept watch. Once we were all over, we carefully made our way to the closest crypt. As we got closer to the crypt, I could see it had some hideous-looking statues of demons on all 4 corners. When we got to the big double doors, we could see someone had written the words Akchasuli and Dersis across both doors. None of us knew Romanian, so we didn't think anything of it. First Lieutenant Klein tried turning the doorknob. As suspected, it was locked, and there was a large chain around both door handles. I thought, whoever locked these doors does not want anyone going inside. Right then one of the men whispered, "I don't have a good feeling about this. Let's go somewhere else." The captain's response was, "Where would you have us go? We're exhausted and can't risk getting found. Lieutenant Klein, do whatever you have to do to get us inside the crypt, but do so quickly and quietly." Lieutenant Klein nodded his head and began removing the pins from inside the hinges with his bayonet. Once the pins were removed, he stuck his bayonet between the door and the door frame and slowly pried it open. As the door opened, a warm gust of air came spewing out. The air smelled odd. There was something off about it. As Lieutenant Klein pulled the door open, making it big enough for us to start going through, no one moved at first. Everyone stood in place. It was clear no one wanted to go inside. It wasn't until Captain Braun whispered loudly, "Go inside, everyone, now," that we started filing in. I was the first one inside, turning on my flashlight as I entered the crypt. I immediately began scanning the area with my flashlight. The room was dark and empty. I wanted to turn around and run. I knew that wasn't an option. As I was scanning the inside of the crypt, I noticed on the left side there were stairs that led down to another room. Right then, someone behind me said under their breath, "We shouldn't be here." As he said that, Lieutenant Klein closed the door to the crypt behind him. Captain Braun instructed everyone to see how much food we had and then get some rest. After checking my pack and seeing I had food for one more day, I lay down on the cold stone floor with my head on my pack, quickly falling asleep. The next thing I remember was the sound of someone yelling out for everyone to come to his location. I immediately jumped up and saw the other men running towards the stairs that led down to the other room. I grabbed my flashlight and proceeded to follow them. An eerie feeling overcame me as I ran down the stairs. I turned the corner and could see all of the men were standing around a large coffin. I walked over to stand next to them and could see the lid to the coffin had been opened just enough to reveal what was inside. I stood there speechless at what appeared to be an old, horrible-looking woman. Seeing a body in a coffin was not unusual. What was frightening was her face didn't appear to be that of a dead person. It wasn't sunken in or decaying, like a dead body usually appears. We stood there for a while looking at the body before Captain Braun spoke up and said, "Something is not right here. This is not the face of a person who has been dead for a while. Seal the coffin and get back upstairs. I don't want anyone else coming back down here. Understood?" We looked at each other with fearful eyes, nodding our heads in acknowledgement as we pushed the heavy stone lid back over the coffin, sealing it shut. No one uttered a word as we made our way back up the stairs. The fear in the air was thick. I could see the other men did not want to stay here any longer. Once we were all upstairs, Captain Braun said, "No one goes back down to that room. Let's get some sleep. We need to wake up early before first light to head back to the mountains and figure out where we took a wrong turn." We all replied, "Yes, sir," as we went and laid back down on our packs. As I laid on the cold stone floor, fear and adrenaline surged through my body. I wanted to stand up and leave immediately, but that was not an option. I must have dozed off again, because the next thing I remember was being jolted awake to the sounds of someone screaming from down in the other room. It was the most horrid scream I'd ever heard. Everyone immediately jumped up. "Who was that? Who's not here?" asked Captain Braun. I looked around to see who was missing and could see First Lieutenant Klein was gone. Captain Braun then instructed Heinrich and I to go downstairs to investigate. Heinrich and I both looked at each other, knowing we did not want to go down there. Again, we had no choice. We grabbed our flashlights and slowly started making our way down the dark stairwell. I was in the lead, and with each step I took, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. My legs were shaking uncontrollably, and so were my arms. I could see the beam from the flashlight bouncing around on the wall as I proceeded down the stairs. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I took a deep breath before turning the corner. In my mind, I was telling myself to be brave, but it wasn't helping much. As I turned the corner with my flashlight in hand, I instantly saw on the stone floor of the crypt what appeared to be the uniform of First Lieutenant Klein. His uniform had been ripped to shreds. There was nothing else. I immediately yelled to Captain Braun, "He's not here, only his uniform. Get down here now." Everyone came running down the stairs, immediately stopping when they saw what I saw. One of the men said, "Where the hell is First Lieutenant Klein? Is that his uniform? It looks like it's been shredded." Captain Braun then instructed me to walk around the coffin to make sure he wasn't anywhere we couldn't see him. There was only a small area he could be hiding. He also told me to grab First Lieutenant Klein's uniform. I found the courage and slowly made my way around the coffin, looking all around me as I did so. The room was pitch black, aside from our flashlights, and I did not want to be there. When I came to First Lieutenant Klein's uniform, I looked closely at it first before picking it up. I noticed there was no blood on it, not a drop. When I reached down to pick it up, A horrific flash of images of First Lieutenant Klein getting ripped apart surged through my mind. This made me drop the uniform and jump back. Captain Braun said, "What's wrong? Pick it up. Let's get on with it." I didn't respond. I took a deep breath, picked up what remained of First Lieutenant Klein's uniform, and walked towards the men who were still standing at the base of the stairs. I handed the uniform to Captain Braun, who then started inspecting it. "This is his uniform for sure. It smells weird, unlike any smell I've encountered." He sat in thought for a moment, then said something that surprised us men. He said, "Everyone upstairs. We're leaving this place. Now." No sooner after Captain Braun said that, we all quickly made our way up the stairs and grabbed our things. I hurriedly grabbed my rifle, pack, and was the first one to the door. I tried slowly pushing it at first to be quiet, but it wouldn't budge. So I pushed a little harder, and it still wouldn't budge. I whispered loudly to Captain Braun, who was picking up his rifle, that the door wasn't opening. He instructed Heinrich to help, being that Heinrich was big and strong. Heinrich came over, and we both pushed as hard as we could at that point, but nothing. It wouldn't move at all. A few more men got on the door, and we all tried pushing it, but again, it would not move. We stopped and looked at each other. I could see panic was starting to set in. I looked back at Captain Braun, who was standing there, rifle in hand, with a worried look on his face. I was about to ask him what we should do next, when suddenly, everyone's flashlights went out. Seconds later, someone screamed horribly from the room below, and shots from the rifle started going off. One of the men shouted, "Who was that?" Someone else responded, "I don't know, but we need to get the hell out of here." It suddenly went silent, and I could hear my heart thumping away in my chest, wanting to jump out. Someone was about to speak when he was suddenly cut off by the horrific screams of someone else, coming from the room below. When the scream stopped, one of the men whispered, "This is creeping death. We're all going to die." At this point, I was sweating and shaking so bad from fear, I thought I might pass out, as my knees buckled. I then whispered out to Captain Braun, "What should we do, Captain? We need to get out of here." He didn't respond. One of the men then whispered and said, "Let's continue trying to open the door. I think it's right behind us. We must get out of here now." I tried turning on my flashlight, but it would not work. I started fumbling around to see if I could find the door. It took me a bit, but I was able to find it. I tried pushing it again as hard as I could, but it would not budge. A few more men joined me, and again we tried, but it would not move. We were standing there trying to catch our breath when I heard what sounded like something moving swiftly through the room. I was trying to figure out what it could be when one of the men that was standing next to me let out a grunting noise, and I could hear him moving away from me, fast. Seconds later, we heard his horrific screams coming from down in the other room. It was then I knew something had grabbed him and took him down to the other room. It was also then I went into shock. My ears started ringing, and I felt like I was outside myself, like this can't really be happening. No sooner had that thought crossed my mind, I again heard the sound of something moving swiftly through the room. The sound of a man grunting, and then the screams. This went on until I figured I was the only one left standing. All I could do was stand there trembling when something suddenly grabbed me, lifted me into the air, slammed me against the crypt's wall with such force I'd never felt, then dropped me to the ground. I laid there on the cold stone floor as I watched the door to the crypt slowly open. When the door opened, letting the light from the sun enter, I could see before me a woman. She turned her head, looking back at me. It was the woman from the coffin. She stood there looking at me with a smile on her face that was as evil as the devil himself, holding the decapitated head of Captain Braun. Then she suddenly was gone. The person interviewing Ulrich Meyer asked why he thought she only let him live. His response was, "I don't know." The interviewers then asked him what he thought the woman from the coffin did with the other men. His response was, "She consumed them. You'll find only their shredded uniforms and some equipment." The last paragraph in the file stated the Romanian army sent several soldiers to check out the crypt to verify his story. The only thing the soldiers found were the shredded uniforms of the men and what was left of their equipment, just like Ulrich had stated. The soldiers did see the words Akchasel and Dersis written on the doors, which means, "Do not enter," in Romanian. They questioned some of the townsfolk who lived nearby. One old lady they questioned said the crypt had been holding a Mima Pajori for over 100 years, and now she'd been released. Ulrich Meyer ended up taking his own life a few months later in a Romanian prison camp. He'd scratched Schleiten de Tod into the wall behind him with his fingernails before hanging himself. For more scary horror stories, please subscribe.